Hello all. Right, my video for tonight is a piece that I wrote for a writing challenge that I'm currently involved in, and I decided to do this in connection with a little challenge, and also because you guys wanted to. I said to you I was doing another video. This one is called Shimmer. She shimmered as she walked into the room. Her silver-grey dress sparkled with the diamantes that were sewn into the dress. Her figure filled the dress admirably, but the slit that was all the way up to her hips was the one thing that everyone could not stop staring at. Her silver heels glittered as well, making the whole vision startling and scintillating. Music that seemed loud and throbbing before suddenly seemed flat and lifeless. Everyone in the room noticed her as she moved. Sensuously, she stepped daintily one foot after the other toward him. Making her way down the floor, she stared straight ahead at her prey. The man that was staring unabashedly at her, admiring her dress, her makeup and her long blonde hair. She wore the shining hair over her left shoulder, draped under her chin, and it showered over her breasts. Striding towards him, she fingered the bracelet that was around her wrist, her collar. She got to him and stopped, looked up at him and whispered, "Master, I take it you approve. I have done what you asked." He smiled down at her, her 5'5" height vastly different to his 6'1" frame. Holding out his hand, she saw his bracelet on his left wrist as well and finally smiled. "Perfect, my pet, absolutely perfect. There was no problem at home?" he asked. His slightly husky, growly voice asked her as he took her hand. "Thank you, sir, no problems at all. The children are all being looked after by their nanny. It is now our time to shine. Shall we?" she said. Her head bowed slightly as she looked at his mouth. "Let's dance, my sweet, let us dance." He smiled at her, and her heart racing, she swayed slightly, her pussy clenched in delight at his words. They walked hand in hand towards the small dance floor, and he wrapped her in his arms as they got onto the space. Music swelled, and the sounds of a tango magically sounded, her face delighting in the music. Moving, they spun, dipped, and stepped across the floor, occupying the space as if only they existed. For the duration, their world was the hypnotic beat of the Latin music, swaying them and enchanting the watchers to their love dance. The music ended, and their world was suddenly invaded by clapping, whistles, and cheers. Wine glasses clinking, people amazed at the performance. Chattering people congratulated them, and she looked around at all the beautiful people, not really hearing them, just experiencing them for their presence. Smiles, of course, hid secrets, and she could see several women were jealously eyeing her dress, as well as the bracelet. She knew that some had been under his spell before. There was the first secret. She knew that resentment hid below the surface. Their smouldering anger boiled over at her presence. Seething eyes flashed looks of pure evil her way. Smiling, she said nothing, merely nodded, the blonde hair bobbing. The smells were a delight of all the various foods that were on display and being brought out. Platters of fish, crab, smoked meats, cheeses, various delicacies that created a melange of flavors and colors. Her eyes flicked from one delicacy to another, and she licked her lips in anticipation. Wanting to try at least one of everything, she looked at her master for his approval. At his nod, she took a plate and slowly weaved through the tables, choosing delicacies and tidbits for her plate, making sure she had enough to share with master. She wanted to sit in his lap and feed him nibbles, just enough to sate him until later. Eyes lingered on her as she sashayed her way back to him, sat down in his lap, and slowly started eating. Her fingers delicate and long, she tore pieces off her food and waited for him to open his mouth before popping them in. Men whispered lusts as they watched the couple, dreaming of her naked, lithe and sinuous in all her glory, while she sat and fed him. Her breasts stretched as she turned and fed him, their soft curves emphasizing her natural beauty, the bare minimum of makeup on her face, Master licked every crumb off her soft fingers as she fed him, enjoying her scent of delicate perfume, the barest hint of a very wet pussy. Smiling, he imagined how the other men were eyeing her up. Imagined her later as he was fucking her senseless. His erection grew, and she tittered at the sensation of him enlarging underneath her. Her smile widened, and she could imagine his hardness in her mouth, then engulfing her pussy, and she moaned softly, just enough to let him know. Reaching out, he patted her ass, smiled, and said, "Kitten, we may need to leave soon. Why don't you go and say goodbye to our hosts?" Obliging, she stood up, walked over to the scowling woman, and extended her hand, wishing to thank them for their wonderful hospitality. "I want to thank you for allowing us to come to the party tonight, and I wish no ill feelings," she said softly, her melodic voice chiming. Shaking hands, the older woman smiled at her. However, there was still an element of quiet, unbridled animosity. She nodded, but did not say a word. The couple left soon afterward, he moving down the steps with her on his arm, with care so as not to let her slip on the rain-slicked stairs. Climbing into his Jaguar, she sat ensconced in the soft, supple leather and breathed in the heady scent. She sighed. "Heavenly. I love this smell. Reminds me of your flogger, master." Her hand snaked over to his crotch, and she squeezed softly, letting him know she was at last ready to be claimed by him tonight. Smiling, he started the car and drove her home, to their home. The end.